This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining this week's NC Spin. You had to know it was going to be an unusual week since we had both Friday the 13th and a harvest moon the same week. Well, Tuesday brought the election of 2 congressmen in the 3rd and 9th districts. On Wednesday, we observed the anniversary of 9/11, and the House called a surprise vote to override the governor's budget veto. We'll ask if this was just hardball politics or was there subterfuge involved. We'll update you on the progress of court-ordered legislative redistricting, and if there's time, we'll talk about DOT's serious shortfall. But you can be sure we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. This week's panel includes Anna Beavon Gravely, the director of NC Free Enterprise, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom, and Rod Schofield of NC Policy Watch. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Before we get started this week, all of us who love justice and love North Carolina are mourning the death of former Supreme Court Justice I. Beverly Lake Jr. this past week. Bev was a good man who will long be remembered for, among other things, as establishing the Innocence Commission in our state. We certainly remember Bev, and all of us probably have stories that we could tell you about him. Anyway, let's get started. We begin by looking at Tuesday's congressional elections in the 3rd and 9th districts. We want our panel to analyze the results and what they might mean for 2020. Anna Beavon, the 3rd district outcome really wasn't too surprising to many people, but what about the 9th district? Democrats had hoped to flip this seat. Why did Republican Dan Bishop prevail?
Well, there are 2 things that stand out to me. One is the rally with President Trump just the day before, and then also Vice President Pence stayed in district with Bishop to campaign the whole day. So that's a first standout. The second is outside spending. This race saw the 2nd highest special election outside spending in U.S. history. We had $11 million in this race, and it was only bested by large amounts of $27 million in 2017.
A lot of people are asking though, Rob, did Trump's visit really have that much impact? Trump carried that 9th district by 12 percentage points in 2016. Dan Bishop only carried it by 2 percentage points.
Yeah, I mean, they had to pull out all the stops. Probably didn't hurt to have Trump here to rally his troops, but this has got to be a worrisome development for the Republicans. I mean, the reality is they've got problems in suburban districts across the country. There are probably 25 districts like this where incumbent Republicans in Congress, are facing the same kind of numbers where solidly Trump districts are now turning, they're split evenly. They got to be worried about that because they're not going to be able to pump that kind of money into all.
Chris, with all this money that Rob's talking about, the turnout was only 37%. Were you a little surprised at that?
Well, not really. I mean, it's a special election. Nobody normally is used to voting on September 10th ever. I do think the Republicans pulled out all the stop. Donald Trump Jr. was here. The president was here. Pence was here the whole time. They spent an inordinate amount of money, and they took a 12-point win by Trump in 2016 and won by 2 points. There's no way they can do that in all these districts I do think the Democratic turnout was not quite as high as people had expected, which is if it had been slightly higher, we would have had even a much closer race than 2 points. I think this, depending on Trump's performance, there's so many things that'll happen between now and November. McCready hasn't said for sure if he's running again. This could be a very close election in 2020.
I think it's worth pointing out this was an expensive race. It does not appear, at least now, the reports will come in later and we'll maybe find out more, but it's not the case that Bishop dramatically outspent McCready. They were about the same. McCready spent more money in hard dollars, way more than Dan Bishop, and then outside money made up the difference. Outside money is actually less valuable than hard money. You buy fewer ad points for it.
Yeah.
So I don't think this was not really a money story.
It
was an expensive race, but it didn't come out the way it did because one side outspent the other. Actually, what happened was, if you look at the numbers, I agree with Rob's diagnosis. The Republicans have a challenge. I just don't think this is new information. In fact, he did better than Mark Harris did last year, and he did better because he lost a little more ground than Harris did in the suburbs, but he gained more ground in rural areas.
You wrote a column about this, and you said that the big issue here was party loyalty.
That was a lot of it because there probably weren't very many swing voters in this story, but to the extent there were some in the suburbs, and there were quite a few in places like Richmond County and Robeson County and Bladen County that have historically voted Democratic. They've been moving Republican. They've moved further Republican. Robeson County is the most clear example where they made up the difference between victory for Dan Bishop is entirely in Robeson County, if you want to look at it.
And AB, this has become, the schism has become even greater in that the more urban areas are voting more Democratic, the more rural areas are voting. Is this a trend that can be reversed? The Democrats were seeking a message here, and McCready was hoping for health care. Did they find a message, or was it just...
Well, I don't think this trend can be reversed in a short amount of time, specifically before 2020. I think this is something that we're going to see. And most of these off-year, or specifically this special election, is used to foreshadow the next election. But I do think that leaning on Trump does show the need to resonate.
And you could see that you can win districts like with those trends, but Republicans to win statewide races, you don't want to have a higher percentage of a declining share of the vote and a declining percentage of a rising share of the vote. So they can't make up the difference in the suburbs with rural
So what
voters.
does this mean for 2020?
Bottom line is that Democrats would have liked nothing better and to send a message to Trump to defeat him, to be able to claim victory on Election Day, but they're still energized. The anti-Trump vote is still very strong. It's growing. It's a big problem for Republicans in the suburbs. I still think it's going to foreshadows an election in 2020. It's going to be big problems for the president.
Well, we were looking at these election results Wednesday morning, and everybody was trying to analyze them. And of course, it was the anniversary of 9/11. But all of a sudden, cell phones started buzzing all over the state, and Twitter world lit up around 10 o'clock when the North Carolina House held a surprise vote to override Governor Cooper's budget veto. Few members of the House were actually present, especially Democrats, and by a 55-9 margin, the deed was done. Democrats were incensed, claiming that they had been told there would be no votes that morning. Republicans claim they never promised one way or the other. John, is this a case of skullduggery and deceit, or just hardball politics?
Actually, I believe neither of those explanations is correct. I think the fundamental problem was a very seriously consequential miscommunication between the leader of the House Rules, David Lewis, and on the Republican side, who had chaired the floor, he had chaired the session on Tuesday, and then the minority leader, Darren Jackson. I think that Jackson truly believed, when he went and asked David Lewis questions about the next morning, I think he really believed that David Lewis told him there would be no votes on anything. David Lewis really believes that's not what he meant to convey. And I think that was a miscommunication that the House, so in other words, I understand the House Democrats being aggrieved. I think they had a good faith understanding of what David Lewis said and that he was authorized to speak on Lewis's.
David Lewis did tell a WRAL television reporter that there was going to be no votes taken.
That is correct. That's where I was going, is there were two things happening here. One was Lewis and Jackson's interchange, which according to his individuals were about different things. But the other thing was David Lewis, I think, truly did not expect there to be votes the next day. The problem is he had no clear guidance from the Speaker and didn't get it. So I think both of those leaders should have done a better job of clearly communicating. Now, the subsequent dispute, Tom, has nothing to do with that. What ultimately happened was a completely false story about 9/11 ceremony, completely false.
Yeah, I got that.
That went national. The reason this story is national is because people not in the leadership went out and said completely unfounded things that became national news.
Well, here's the reason the story went national. Speaker Moore knew when he looked at the House of Representatives that morning, no matter what had been communicated, he knew that after weeks of Democrats leaving their sick beds, coming back from chemotherapy, canceling family vacations to make sure they were all sitting there, he knew that the Democrats believed there would be no vote, so there'd be a heck of a lot more than 9. This wasn't a 1 or 2 Democrats were gone, so he would take that opportunity. There were 9 of them there. So clearly the Democrats believed, all of them, that there would be no vote. So for the Speaker to act like this is some failing of the Democrats to show up is insane. And I think it's a big, huge betrayal of democracy and trust and the way that institution operates, which nobody will get over that for a long time.
If that was in fact the case.
How can it not be the case? There were 9 Democrats
The thing about it was the House Speaker.
No one that I know of is disputing that the Republicans, when they got there, and the Democrats, that they clearly recognized something must have happened while the Democrats were there.
Well, the Speaker tweeted
dispute as to whether they knew ahead of time.
The Speaker sent out to all of the Republican members to be present the next day.
He did not do that.
I've been watching
He said he did.
No, the whips did that, and they did that specific to a redistricting vote. Now, the Democrats say that's a ruse. That was a false statement. So this has devolved into conspiracy theories that I simply do not think are warranted.
To me, none of that matters. It doesn't matter. The Speaker knew that that the Democrats all believed that they all believed that there would be no vote. If there were 1 or 2 who weren't there,
I think he learned that later. I think he knew
there were 9 of them there.
I understand.
I mean, there would not be 9. There'd be 49 or 50.
No. What you're saying that the Speaker knew at the moment that the Democrats had some false information.
That's right.
I think he learned that later.
Well, so let me ask you
this. But he still held the vote, I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Why were so many Republicans present?
I think there were a lot of Republicans not there.
There were a number that weren't there, but there still was a pretty good number of Republicans present.
What you guys are saying is not wrong, but what stands out to me is, as a citizen, when I elect someone to go into office, I have the minimum expectation that they show up. They just didn't show up.
No.
Well,
I disagree with that. I disagree. Most of the Democrats were in the building. They were doing other things. They didn't not show up. I think they truly believed there would be no vote.
Of course they did. I've been going to the legislature for 28 years. I've watched them filter into the House hundreds of times. It doesn't happen that way, that only one party is there like that, unless some people knew ahead of time what was going on. I actually believe the Republicans knew what they were doing. At least a lot of them did. I think it was premeditated, and I agree with Chris. I think it was a disgrace and an assault on democracy.
Okay, let's flip this over on the other side, though. This override had been on the House calendar for months, or not months, weeks anyway, every session, and it never got brought to the floor, primarily because the Speaker knew he didn't have the votes to pass it.
Or he had pledged not to do it.
Which
he did multiple times.
He did. Now, so under the circumstances, isn't this just hardball politics?
Well, in the audio from that whole day or that morning, there are 3 or 4 pauses where Speaker Moore is leaning over talking to staff. Through the audio, he's leaning, asking, are you sure? Are you sure we have the numbers? Are we sure we didn't say that we weren't going to have this vote? Just to clarify, to make sure.
Think looking at the House floor, he knew that the Democrats didn't know there was going to be a vote. By the way, the staff was told there was going to be no votes. The legislative staff was told.
By whom?
By David Lewis.
Okay, so this is, I agree. This is a controversy that we don't have enough information. But here's what I think, because I do think that once they learned the backstory of why the Democrats weren't there, and if they'd thought about it, I do believe the Republicans should have considered rethinking this in the afternoon session when it became clear what had happened. Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think that to say that they were engaged in elaborate conspiracy, I would need a lot more evidence than is available.
Rob,
the evidence argues against it.
Rob, you said you've been covering the legislature for 28 years. And
I know, you longer probably.
Well, there are a number of us that have been over there. Have you ever seen an outburst on the floor like Representative Deb Butler did Wednesday morning?
I've seen some amazing outbursts, actually. I can remember a lawmaker standing on their desk one time, Billy Richardson, back in the day. But she was, incensed at what was happening. Yeah. And it actually got to a point where members were gathering around her to protect her from being arrested or accosted by the sergeant at arms and perhaps the law enforcement. I mean, it was an extraordinary
situation. Got really heated.
But the thing speaks for itself. Chris is right. Speaker Moore knew what the deal was. He looked out on that floor. you can talk about who knew what when, but it would have been the honorable thing to do, and he did not do the honorable thing.
Well, now wait a minute here. This has always been the case that in situations like this, when you got the votes, you put it on
Never
the floor.
like this.
When you don't have the
Not like
votes, you
this.
don't put it
Not
on
when
the
you have
floor.
a system. Not when you have a system. We've never had the veto garage before Tom Tillis instituted
Right.
it, where it was always looming, and parties, when they knew there was going to be a vote, would show up. When they knew there wasn't, they were doing other things.
All right, so
Let's be
here's
clear
the
about
governor.
this. If in fact that 9/11 conspiracy theory had not traveled through the national media during the day, I do think the Republicans might have been more open to talking about it. The problem is they started to get, and they have continued to get, death threats, crazy calls from around the country about how dare you take advantage of a 9/11 ceremony where the Democrats were all present, which is a complete fabrication. But some of the Democrats put that out there, not the
There was
leadership.
a Democrat at a 9/11
Yes,
ceremony.
one Democrat.
And the governor was.
And the governor.
And the governor was part of putting
the
the
governor
story out.
called the House Speaker a liar.
He did.
I've never seen that before. And
people did.
furthermore, there's protest calling for the Speaker to resign.
A lot of people.
I've not seen that before.
I really think it's more his legacy. I mean, I think this is going to go down. This will be what he'll be remembered
Another
for.
HB2, huh?
Well, I think even worse. I think he'll be remembered as the speaker who didn't run the body in an honorable way.
This is so reminiscent of what happened in August of 2005. For those of us who were around then, the House lottery was, the North Carolina lottery was the big topic that session. We got to August, the House had passed it. The Senate didn't have the votes to pass it. Mark Bassnight, who was the Senate President pro tem, adjourned the Senate, said they were through. They weren't going to take any more votes during the session, sent them home. Then he found out there were 2 Republicans. And by the way, this had been a Republican-Democrat thing also. Republicans were opposed to the lottery, Democrats
Not
were.
all Democrats.
Yeah.
They were
Not
for it,
all, but yeah,
most-
okay.
most-
All right.
progressives
Unlike
against
this,
it.
which was a partisan vote. But go
So,
ahead.
so 2 of the Republicans in the Senate were absent. Bassnight found out they were going to be absent, called everybody back to town, and put it on the floor. As a matter of fact, then Lieutenant Governor Bev Perdue was the tiebreaker in that. So it is.
Well, here's 2 points. One is that the at least a couple Republicans cooperated. John Garwood was one of the Republicans who was not there. He agreed to pair his vote. If he had not done that, it wouldn't have passed.
And so did Harry Brown.
was
You mean he agreed to pair the vote, but then he took it back?
right. And
That's the point.
And, right.
Yeah.
And Harry Brown, who's now the majority leader, was on his honeymoon in the faraway remote location of Myrtle Beach. And apparently was unavailable, like there are no phones in Myrtle
They
Beach.
don't have any phones.
So, okay.
That's why they differentiate between North Myrtle and
Two
Myrtle.
versus 7.
Memo to
is a little
self,
different.
check on phones in Myrtle Beach. So far as it goes, the Senate hasn't put it on the floor yet. Speaker Berger, or President Pro Tem Berger, says it might go on the floor next week. Has he got the votes to pass it?
I don't think he does if everybody's there. I think the Democrats.
He needs 1 Democrat.
Right. And everybody needs to be there because it's 29-21 right now.
I'll give you a weird wild card in this.
Yeah,
Sorry to
there's an
interrupt.
interesting one.
One of the state senators has just been elected to the U.S. Congress.
Yes.
When is he going to be sworn in? When will his appointment be appointed?
'Cause he can't hold 2 offices
Well,
at the
and
same
when will
time.
his appointment be made by their local Republican committee? And when will the governor formally make that appointment? There's a lot of timing things that they can't afford to lose Senator Bishop's vote. The governor has some say about when that appointment is made.
Would you want to be the Democrat that crossed the lines and voted to override that veto? You deal in politics and campaigns. Would you want to be that Democrat?
Probably not next week.
I think the message has been received by the Democrats in the Senate.
And one of the
They're not
Democrats
gonna
who voted for the budget, Don Davis, has said publicly he's going to vote to sustain the governor's veto. So it does appear the Democrats are in line.
So do you think then that this is going to become a reality, John? Or do you think there's going to be enough controversy about it that calmer heads might prevail and say, wait a minute, let's try doing this a different way?
I think the Republicans were already winning on the issue by passing the budget in pieces,
Right.
and they will probably end up still having to do that.
I was going to ask, because if the override goes through, then the monies for Medicaid,
Yeah, that ought to be resolved.
the Medicaid expansion goes through. So assuming that the override holds, they're able to do that, does that mean that Medicaid expansion, I said Medicaid expansion, it's Medicaid reform, the monies for that, is Medicaid expansion dead?
Well, Berger seems to be irrevocably opposed to it. But the thing that needs to happen here, of course, is they still need to sit down with Governor Cooper and negotiate this thing out. Moore has made noises now about perhaps moving the Republican version of Medicaid expansion in the
do
House.
they
but
have
they've
to
just-
actually
Which has been
sit
listed
down
on the
and talk to
calendar
them?
every day, by
I
the
think
way.
they will run that bill. Yes.
Yeah.
You do?
Yes.
In the House?
Yes.
In the Senate?
I don't know.
Because Rob's telling me what I think everybody else has heard.
It's hard to imagine.
Okay, so tremendous amount of controversy, heated feelings, and all of this kind of stuff. Well, it just continued on further as they were trying to consider this redistricting thing. A 3-judge panel of 2 Democrats and 1 Republican had ruled unanimously North Carolina's House and Senate districts must be redrawn before another election was held. The judges said it was their, quote, inescapable conclusion that the maps do not permit voters to freely choose their representatives, but rather representatives are choosing their voters based on sophisticated partisan sorting. They ordered the new maps be drawn by Wednesday of this coming week. Rob, we've been following the stories coming out of the legislature. This override just complicated the whole thing. Where do we stand there?
Well, we thought this would be the big story of the week, and it kind of got sloughed down to second place. Our Melissa Boughton at NC Policy Watch has been tweeting up a storm all week. You can follow her tweet. She's got every little detail of what's been going on in the discussions in the Senate and the House. Looks like the House is moving forward, the Senate probably next week with their maps. The thing that really stands out to me, though, as I watch the process is incumbent protection. I guess that's still theoretically constitutional, and that seems to be driving a lot of it.
Double bunking.
Lawmakers are sitting around computer screens basically trying to figure out how to protect their seats, and that's a lousy way still to draw maps.
But the court said this had to be a transparent process, and we heard charges and countercharges all during the week about, well, the Republicans are not doing a transparent process. They made the public leave some of the meetings. The Democrats are meeting privately. How transparent do you think this thing has been?
Well, I think it's being pretty transparent for as much as it can be. I mean, because transparency was not exactly what the court said. They said, like, play out in public
hearings.
Public hearings. What does that exactly mean? What about people who don't have internet? Like, do we need to go then meet in a courthouse to have these conversations? Like, I feel like that stipulation by the courts was a little bit difficult to take place.
And then we get into this situation of maps, and whose maps do you choose? They had Joe Y. Chin, who had been considered the experts by the plaintiffs in that lawsuit, but he had drawn like 2,000 maps. And so the Senate comes out and brings a lottery machine that says they're going to use. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I haven't, though. A random choice of maps that are otherwise equivalently rated on the various states. That's a reasonable. I don't know about using a lottery machine, but actually that's good. That's better than a biased map.
So, Chris, what happens if A, the legislature is not able to draw maps, or B, if they draw the maps and the court doesn't approve
Well, the court will appoint a special master to draw the maps, and we've already had the Stanford professor being suggested as somebody who draw them. There might be other special masters appointed. That'll be what happened. I actually think that one of the lessons for getting what happens really is, I mean, Rob referred to it, I was watching some of this online when it was happening. It is stunning to see, and this is not just a Republican phenomenon, to see legislators walk up to the terminal and add districts to their own, add precincts and neighborhoods to their own districts. That's exactly why this whole process is so insane.
And that is allowed by the court.
And it is allowed. It
decision,
is so insane. I think the fact that if the public really pays attention to this, there's already overwhelming support for redistricting reform. This will send it off the charts. It's insane that I can sit there as a legislator and say, no, I want that neighborhood. Give that neighborhood to him. It's really terrible.
And they know the partisan makeup.
But the other thing, Anna Bevan, is the court said if we don't get this thing resolved, we're going to delay the March primaries. Now, the Republicans obviously do not want a delay in the primaries because it delays the presidential primary also, right?
Yeah.
I don't think
No,
they
they
would
could
do
separate
that.
them.
They would
You don't?
separate them, yeah.
They separated them before.
That's not exactly what was said.
What did they say?
What was said is that it could include not just the statewide elections, but all elections. And so I think that is
unlikely, though.
I think that's a huge overreach by the court.
So what does this do with redistricting reform? The FAIR Act, there are a number of proposals, John. Where are we with that?
I still think that they need to do it, and I still think that they will ultimately, both sides will realize they have to do it. For one thing, that the court did not resolve the incumbency protection problem. We need to do that.
But they need to take it out of the hands of the legislature or legislative staff. That should not be the people doing this.
I need to put it in the hands of each of my 4 panelists because I need to ask you to tell me something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon.
Fascinating court case in Virginia. Virginia Supreme Court is trying to decide if private foundations set up by public universities are subject to the public records law. This could set a precedent and change the way we get information about our universities.
Interesting. Rob Schofield.
Great story this week by our Lisa Sorg at NC Policy Watch. She had been doing an analysis, an expose on toxic chemicals in compost. We have new rules from the Environmental Management Commission that validated her research.
Tell us something we don't know, A.B.
Those of us in Raleigh know Ashley Christensen very well. She is opening up her
You're going to the pizza pies.
I am, of course. Her 6th restaurant, 2-time James Beard winner. It's going to be great, and it's pizza.
John, tell us something we don't know.
President Trump tweeted that Dan Bishop was down 17 points. Trump came in, resolved the victory. Everybody made fun of President Trump for making that tweet, and I don't usually agree with him. But the campaign manager put out a poll that they had taken that it was 14 points down, and everybody said that poll must have been made up by the Republicans to make Trump look better. That is a ludicrous suggestion that they spent Wednesday morning making up a fake poll.
Well, he certainly didn't take any time.
This is a good example of how
taking
ridiculous our discourse has become, that everybody believes the worst conspiracy theories of the other.
But he took the credit for the victories.
He shouldn't have taken the credit, but I'm just saying, this was silly.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And while there, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and also our YouTube channel. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.